Well, hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. We're live. We're normally recorded, and I upload these videos to all of the various platforms. But I wanted to do this live on YouTube for the simple reason when I started the podcast, about a year and a half ago, they were audio only. I did that for about half the time, and that was great for iTunes and even for Facebook and Spotify and all of those various audio platforms. But I kind of neglected YouTube because nobody wants to listen to an audio podcast on YouTube. Okay, well, so we started to get some following and some listeners on the audio portion of the podcast. Then we went to doing videos and started uploading them to the places where they're seen, including Twitter and Facebook. Still very popular. My God, I did a video on Facebook not too long ago, a podcast that had over 5,000 views. Was really happy with that. But YouTube wasn't generating the kind of results that it needs to. So I want to boost this. Although I've gotten a couple of thousand there, at times too. So I wanted to go ahead and do one, particularly with our ever popular uh, Professor Steffen Schmidt, because I knew that'd be a good place to start. And I wanted to start this off by talking about why I wanted to get him on now. And it's because the Republican National Committee chairwoman, Ronna McDaniel, announced last week that President Donald Trump is accepting the Republican nomination in Jacksonville, Florida. Now, I don't know much about Jacksonville. I know somebody that does, and it's the doc. Jacksonville, I've always known, does have a very deep running redneck constituent, which you wouldn't think. You think Florida, but it's actually the deepest of the South because it's even further south than Mississippi and Alabama in northern Florida. But anyway, if Republicans stick to the schedule they previously planned, Trump will deliver his acceptance speech on August 27th in Jacksonville. That day marks the 60th anniversary. That's what we're going to be talking about with the doc of the brutal beating of black activists protesting segregation that came to be known as Axe Handle Saturday. Now, that may be new to you, but it ain't new to the people down there because back in the day, nearly 200 white attackers, according to the Florida Historical Society, used axe handles and baseball bats to beat black demonstrators. And this is what brings us to the Lucken Endowed Professor of Political Science from Iowa State University, Dr. Steffen Schmidt. Good morning, Doc.
Good morning.
Well, the thing that is of particular interest to you, I know this leapt off the page for you personally because you were there.
I've been everywhere, and I was going to a military boarding school in Jacksonville in 1959, 60, and it was pretty harsh, and I was not a good boy, so I was constantly on detention, and I couldn't go on leave on Saturdays. We were allowed to go from the base into town, to go shopping and have lunch and just hang around, maybe go to a movie with some of my other cadets from the Bowles Military Academy. And yeah, that Saturday we were in town, and it was. I grew up in Colombia, South America, and the idea of racial conflict and hatred outright. Into town, it was a very hot day. I said to my friends, I gotta drink some water. So in the Central Park there in Jacksonville, there was a drinking fountain, and I went over there, and it said colored, and I thought, well, this is going to be cool. It's like water that's been colored. And they said, hey, Schmidt, you can't drink from that one. That's for black people, colored people, as they called them in those days. You got to go around the other side where the white drinking fountain is. And that was the beginning of that day, which turned out, as you said, to be a violent day. And the reason for the violence was that it was the beginning of integration. Now, I'm not a really old guy, but it was in those days that integration actually began, and we think now today we have African Americans all over in all kinds of positions, great stars, movies, on television. In those days, blacks were really segregated, isolated, were not permitted to eat in restaurants except in black restaurants, and were not allowed to stay in hotels except black hotels. And so the day unfolded as you described it, with a lot of the hardware stores and other downtown businesses basically putting boxes with axe handles. These were replacement handles for axes and baseball bats in front of their businesses and giving them away for free, and people coming and getting them and going after blacks. In particular, there was a lunch counter. I think it must have been a Walgreens drugstore. Blacks, coloreds in those days had gone in to ask to be served, and they weren't being served, and they were basically evicted. And there was a lot of violence. It was a terrible experience for me. It was a life-changing experience. And it may be one reason why I went into the field of political science, because hell, I was supposed to take over my dad's eyeglass business, very successful, largest in the country. Contact lenses, we had a factory where we made the frames. But that day shocked me so much, and I realized how much everything in life is affected by politics. You know, people say, I'm not interested in politics, and I always tell my students who say that, yeah, but politics is interested in you.
That's exactly right. I one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about this is because of your background, which is very interesting, just aside from the race relation element of it. But I got to explain a little bit about how I became aware of the situation that you're talking about growing up here that was not segregated like what you're talking about. Back in the early 60s, I was a big baseball fan. My dad was a baseball player. I was a big fan of that. Bob Gibson was pitching for the St. Louis Cardinals. I mean, world-class pitcher. I mean, I gotta just idolize the guy. He came out and wrote a book, and it was all about race relations and how he had been discriminated against. And I was completely unaware of it as a kid. Back in the early 60s, he was probably the biggest star in Major League Baseball, certainly with the St. Louis Cardinals, a former Harlem Globetrotter. He went to the St. Louis Cardinals. You know, that's not that far south of where we're at right now, in my mind anyway, St. Louis. He couldn't stay in the same hotel as his teammates. As you mentioned, couldn't go to the same restaurants. He had to sleep on the other side of town. And me just being a kid growing up listening to the games on the radio, yeah, I was completely unaware of that. But Bob Gibson kind of made me aware. And so here you are, a young man going to school in North Florida up there. But your background, you've always been very sensitive and aware of race relations. You grew up in Colombia, came to this country, and you're a founding, sustaining member of LULAC, and you've always been a go-to guy on these topics.
Well, you know, my parents were very good to me, and they taught me that, you know, a society is made up of everybody that lives there. And you can't sort out people and say, we don't like these people, so we're going to send them off to concentration camps. My parents were German immigrants, and they really hated what happened to Germany in the 1930s and 40s, and would never let me not understand that, you know, you accommodate everybody in society as best you can, and you don't discard people. And so in my hometown in Colombia, there were people of every color. One of my best friends in my boarding, it was a private school, not a boarding school that my dad started. One of the guys was called El Negro, which means the black guy. And he was dark skinned. And we never thought a word, you know, that he should be living in a different part of town or was different, because in Colombia, the gradation, as everywhere, was all the way from really charcoal black to brown to, you know, lighter. There are no white people, of course. What we call white people are really pink people. And they were all part of my friend's group, and we had wonderful parties and invited each other to birthday parties. And I don't remember ever any hatred. I remember kind of joking and mocking and, you know, calling me the little German guy. And but it was shocking to me to be confronted for the first time with real hatred, and why these people were beating up people who had the money, who were nicely dressed, and were going into a drugstore to have a hamburger and a milkshake, just like anybody else would. I couldn't understand it. I still don't understand it, really.
No, I don't either. It did leave you being bilingual. Of folks that ever watch it, you might see the doc on Telemundo because he's got this Spanish
Yeah.
speaking background that leaves him well prepared to talk on those networks. But he's been on
And
CNN, MSNBC, everywhere. I'm always delighted to
the
have you
other
here.
thing, let me tell you, George, that I was, and they sent me the link. I'll send it to you if you want. I was on South Korean cable television. I don't speak Korean, so I was interviewed in English with subtitles.
Yeah.
But it was a half-hour, amazing, unbelievable documentary on the trouble facing in this country right now, on the violence, on the Floyd murder, and on the protests. So yeah, I need to learn Korean.
Well, add that to your resume, I guess. And well, folks that have questions for the doc that might be tuning in, I'll leave those in the chat, and I'll try to get to those. Now, one of the things I wanted to get to you about was kind of an opinion, actually. But so here's Trump going to have this convention in the Carolinas, and he's going to announce down there in Jacksonville, and then he comes out and announces a rally in Tulsa on Juneteenth. And I'm looking at this, and man, is this coincidence? I mean, he wants to announce down there on Axe Handle Saturday in Jacksonville, then he wants to do this thing in Tulsa, and is he just completely tone deaf and out of touch, or is any of that purposeful? Do you think?
Oh, I can't believe that presidents are really busy, and he can't check out everything. So somebody scheduled this in Tulsa. And whoever scheduled it is either the dumbest individual ever in history advising a president, or knew exactly what he was doing and was trying to get there to be protests, there would be plans, there would be burned, because certainly President Trump has not shown himself to be understanding or compassionate with the plight of minorities, horrible, deteriorating racial situation that we're facing, and to schedule him on a day that is celebrating the end of slavery was grossly irresponsible, and it had to be deliberate. I mean, I can't imagine, that they said, well, geez, we didn't know. Why Tulsa? Why on that day, right? Nobody
Yeah.
goes to Tulsa, by the way.
Yeah. And people are unaware. Yeah, scene of the worst race riot in American history. My God, some black guy, young guy, was accused of touching basically a white gal accidentally, maybe as it turns out, in an elevator down there, and they blew the town up. They went door to door, took people, drug them into the street, killed them. It was just a horrific thing down there in Tulsa. Now Trump's going to go down there and hold a rally on the anniversary. It's incomprehensible. It goes back to that. Yeah, go ahead.
Of course, they changed the date and moved it up a day away from there. But Jacksonville is still on the schedule, and I predict. I love to predict because nobody remembers it, and if I was right, then I'll tell everybody that I predicted it correctly. That there'll be violence in Jacksonville, because Jacksonville is a city with a large black population and a bad history of race relations. It's the largest city in Florida. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
It is the most populous city in Florida. It's not Orlando or Miami, and so it is a city that's a rough town, as I said in that little thing I sent you. It has the naval station that was right across from my military school on the St. Johns River. So it has a lot of military and sailors and others. It has a huge port. And as cadets, whenever we could on a Saturday, we would go to the commercial port, and we would try to find a Spanish or an Argentine or a Mexican naval vessel. They came in there to supply themselves and do repairs and stuff. And why? Because they were so nice to us. Those sailors and officers from those countries would invite us for lunch, and we were, 15, 16, 17 years old, and they would serve us beer with our lunch. So it was the best way to get a free beer, was to go to the commercial port and try to visit one of the foreign military vessels. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Well, as you mentioned, it is a tinderbox. I've got an extremely good friend of mine that served in the Navy down there in Jacksonville, and the locals, the local guys, the young men in particular, resent those guys because, of course, they're dating the local women. They hate that. You've got this racial tension, which is terrific. I mean, in Jacksonville, because again, it is the deep South. There's a lot of things that could come together there and not go well for Trump and his announcement or rally or whatever that is. And then Tulsa, it always reminds me, again, Doc, I reference this all the time, that movie scene in Casino. You're either too dumb or you're in on it. It has to be one or the other. There's no in between. I mean, it's a pretty black and white thing, and neither one
I think so.
is good.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I agree with you. I always think of Jacksonville as southern Georgia.
Yes.
Because that's
southernmost. Deepest.
I mean, because it's actually northern Florida, but it's pretty much Georgia in terms of the history and the culture and stuff. So, and of course, Georgia, I am so sad and angry. I love Atlanta. I've done CNN and Espanol from their headquarters in Atlanta many times. And to see Georgia and especially Atlanta basically crumbling, falling apart, more police violence, shooting a guy in the back. What kind of law enforcement is it to shoot someone in the back? I think the Supreme Court has said it's illegal. The guy was running away. And there are not many excuses. People say, yeah, but he took away the taser from a cop. Yeah, right. He did. Yeah.
Well, they knew it was a taser. The guy that shot him definitely knew that it wasn't a gun because he had his gun to shoot him with, for God's sake. I don't know. I knew that. I follow your Twitter feed, and you took extreme exception to that. Obviously, I mean that's it's what I talked about on an earlier podcast. It has I don't know exactly how to describe it exactly, but when they get a guy down, when they get somebody restrained, which they thought they had with this guy, their mortal fear is that he's going to get up and either put a whooping on him, which that would be a major fear, or that he's going to get away, because that's a major insult to their ego. That I mean they're hunters basically, and and part of their quarry got up off the ground and managed to get away and take one of their weapons, a taser or whatever. Well, you got to go back to the police sergeant. You got to go to the station house. You got to explain yourself to your superiors and your peers, and nobody wants to do that. It enrages them. Even if you take off in a car, I mean, man, if they catch you, it used to be back in the day, you did not want to be caught because they're going to put a whooping on you at the least, and maybe do something else at worst. So that guy's name is Rayshard Brooks. Yeah,
George, it looks right now like in going forward, if you do what these guys did and you go back to your sergeant, you'll go back to your officers, they're going to fire you, because law enforcement is there to provide protection and peace and tranquility to our society. And when law enforcement loses that particular credential and people don't trust police, I have a lot of white friends, and I ask them, what's your experience if you see a police car turning on its bubble lights behind you? How many of them say, oh, thank God, I love police? Most people have terrible experiences with the police, who are rude, who are not friendly, who assume that every person that they stop is a killer and is going to shoot them. And justifiably, they're nervous because there are way too many people with guns that turn them on the police. And so we have this vicious cycle of too much violence, too many people with guns, and the police are nervous. And the training of police is to basically arrest everyone. And this guy in at the Wendy's, you know, they woke him up. They said, "Move your car over there to that parking lot." We have some great video now from their cameras, and he says, "Okay," and he pulls the car out of the drive-through and parks it. And they talk to him. They get him out of the car, and they're talking. Why did they have to give him a sobriety test? He wasn't driving. He wasn't, attacking anyone, robbing, stealing, threatening anyone. He was asleep. So they give him a sobriety test, and he fails it. And then they decide to arrest him. And as I said, many people have said, they could have either said, "Okay, leave your car here. We're going to drive you home, or we'll call your spouse, your wife, or your friend to come and pick you up here because you shouldn't be driving." That would have been a good solution. And the cops could have written that down as a successful law enforcement action. That would have been very successful, and nothing much would have come of it. They would not have been chastised by their buddies and by their supervisors for being nice to someone, I don't think. But to then wrestle him to the ground and try to control him, it's just all this unnecessary stuff. I saw a couple of kids at a lake recently. I took my dog for a walk, and there were a bunch of young people, and they were sitting on rocks by the lake, and they were drinking beer. Well, it's a state park, and you're not allowed to drink beer. So should I have called the cops and said, "Hey, there are a bunch of kids drinking beer"? The police would have shown up, and there could have been a disaster. Who cares? Yes, you're not supposed to drink when you're underage, but if you're not threatening anyone, you're not driving, you're not doing anything dangerous. We have, George, I'm going to say this, and the people watching me some are going to agree and some will be angry. We have too many laws. We have too many laws that prohibit us from doing almost everything. And if that's the case, then the police at any given moment can stop and arrest you because you're probably doing something illegal that may not be dangerous, that may not harm anyone, but that the law says you're not allowed to do that. So we're going to arrest you. And when that happens, a lot of times the moment of the arrest goes south, and there is something terrible that happens, and the consequences are what we're seeing now every single day on television. Yeah. I lived in a country where you could not trust the police. No one trusted the police in Colombia. And as a result, everyone essentially did whatever the hell they wanted because they knew that if you called the police, it was just a lot of trouble. And so if you had a problem with someone, you took care of it yourself. You didn't call the cops because you didn't trust them. We can't have that happen in this country.
Well, we've got the largest prison population in the world in this country. 70% of the people in prison currently are Hispanic or black. And racism runs extremely deep in this country. The other element, you talked about these kids and these cops out on patrol. We started arming police with all of these military weapons, basically, going clear back to the Clinton era. Now, Obama suspended that program after Ferguson. Tulsi Gabbard, by the way, let me put her name in there. She called for the demilitarization of police right after that in 2014. But Trump, after he was elected, re-implemented that program, and since 2017, $500 million in military equipment has been forwarded to these police departments around the country. And we're not just talking, sidearms. We're talking bayonets, grenade launchers, little mini half-track tank things like we're seeing on the streets of Minneapolis. My God, as you mentioned, we've got far too many laws. We have far too many people being arrested. In Baltimore, that guy that I think he was the mayor, Mallory, what was his name? He bragged one time. It's a city of 600,000 people. One year they had over 100,000 people arrested in Baltimore. My God, what could be the possible reason for that? Well, uh, before we lost you here today, I wanted to, kind of just get, your thoughts because the news is just, it's hard to keep up with. What are you following right now? And in particular on the political side, here in the state of Iowa, we've got a couple of dandies shaping up. This Ernst versus Greenfield race. And then we talked a little bit in the last podcast about J.D. Scholten and the guy that beat him up in Stephen King's district. They got his name, Randy Feemstra.
No, we have a very interesting season coming up in November. On November 3rd, everyone should go out and vote. Everybody should register to vote. We've got this, I think, unnecessary controversy going on about the secretaries of state mailing out absentee ballots, which, some Republicans think that it stacks the cards against Republican candidates. All the evidence that I've looked at says not really. It may actually benefit the Republicans because a lot of older people who are not good at mobility and can't, really go to the polling places, are probably voting Republican. And if they can get a ballot, it probably helps Republicans. But we still have this idea that it helps Democrats. And so that's coming up. And it'll be an interesting year. I mean, Joni Ernst definitely has a competitive race on her hands. The latest polls.
Yeah, we're getting a little internet freeze there. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry about that. We live in Iowa. In the rural areas, we don't have very good internet. But yeah. Joni Ernst is, has a real competitive race. That she's got a campaign. She's got to explain things. And so that'll be interesting. And Steve King was the incumbent, and it's sometimes hard, to beat an incumbent. But now there's no incumbent here in the 4th district in Iowa, and so that'll make it even more interesting to see how that turns out.
Well, I know you'll be very busy as a commentator because the eyes of the world really are going to be on Iowa, particularly with this Ernst race against Greenfield, because you couldn't have a more quintessential clash between politicos. You've got Ernst, and she is the poster woman for the Republican Party, basically. If everyone recalls, they wanted Sarah Palin, for God's sake. They nominated her for vice president, but she obviously was not up to the challenge in more ways than one. But Ernst does not like her. I mean, she's got a military background. She's not stupid. You may not agree with her politics, and I don't, but she's got the talking points for the Republican Party down chapter and verse. I mean, she's much more well-liked by the Republican machinery than Donald Trump ever will be. I mean, she could be, she could be a friend of any Republican that wanted to vote. So they're all going to come out and vote for her. I could see her really even rising above the U.S. Senate if she continues her upward movement in politics. And then, of course, you've got Greenfield, the moderate Democratic, again, woman, the face of the Democratic Party, what they would like for it to be anyway, and that's going to be her challenger. Man, all eyes are going to be on the Hawkeye State come November.
Well, they are, especially because now there are enough Senate races in the United States that look like they're in play. It's going to be amazing. If the Democrats take the Senate, it will be very, very hard on Donald Trump.
Well, yeah. I mean, he won't have either house. It does have the judiciary, obviously, if it comes to any of those types of things. And although I will say this, Doc, and I mean, this is my progressive leanings, and I want to bring this out again. You think that that's the case, but I'm mad as hell at the Democratic House as an example. They basically have approved all of Trump's agenda. They even funded his border wall. They approved funding for that stupid-ass Space Force thing that he has. They gave him $131 billion extra for the Department of Defense for the military budget. This is the guy that they say is an agent of Russia and is guilty of treason, who they tried to get in Russiagate and impeach in Ukrainegate. And Pelosi and the Democrats, which, you know, in the House they control, they've done all of that. So I don't know. Let's hope
Yeah, no, I
if they
mean,
get, yeah. Go ahead.
We know that the Democrats have a progressive wing that doesn't do very well often.
They don't
in terms
do anything.
Of numbers. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, but you know, that's just that's the cards that you're handed, George. And you know, Bernie Sanders is not going to be president, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is great in her district in New York, but she could never get elected dog catcher in Story County, much less elected to the House in Iowa. And so you've got, you know, the reality of regional and even sub-regional politics. Different counties are different. You know, the first district in Iowa is different from the fourth.
That's that's great. Well, we got to let you go. I really appreciate you coming on YouTube here with us live today. And we'll check back here very shortly because the politics of the day are changing. I love that quote that you gave. I mean, you may not be interested in politics, but politics are certainly interested in you. And these protesters...
And it's going to come and get you.
Yeah,
it's going to come and get you.
Yeah, well, and you pointed out a lot of the call for the defending of the police. You said, be careful what you wish for. I saw that on Twitter also, because you've got the situations in Libya, and Somalia is a good example. And Somalia, we're at war in Somalia. It's one of the 7 wars that the United States is involved in. It never gets any press coverage. You're not even aware of it. And Libya, again, you talk about poster children. It's the milk carton poster child for failed regime change wars that, again, Tulsi Gabbard was talking about. My God, that did not work out at all. We thought, well, we'll get rid of Gaddafi over there. You know, they pulled him out of a sewer pipe and bayoneted him to death on video, basically. And now Libya has open slave trading on its streets that you can watch on YouTube. That's how bad things have gotten in Libya. So chaos, you know, adores a vacuum.
And I know, and you're so right about the whole issue of the United States getting involved in countries all over the world. We haven't had much success getting involved in other countries because the locals, their grandparents are buried down the road in a cemetery. They live there. It's their place.
And they don't forget.
We come in and try to tell them how to live, no matter how reasoning may be, you know, they're not going to like it very much. And so, you know, we can have the most expensive, technologically sophisticated military in the world, which we may have, but a bunch of people in black pajamas can kill our military in Vietnam, and a bunch of people with, you know, headgear and have trapped us in Afghanistan now for what, 18 years? It's not easy to get involved in other countries and try to reshape them.
Well, I'll leave it at this. People that don't like to follow the news, they don't like politics or whatever. How about movies? Do you like The Godfather? Do you remember what happened there? Do you remember when Michael Corleone went back to the back into Sicily and killed Don Cheech, stabbed him there because of what he did to his parents? That's the way these people are, and who can blame them in these countries in Afghanistan and in Iraq? I keep telling people that as many as 1 million people, but certainly hundreds of thousands of innocents, children and women, got killed in that Iraq war for a lie, for a misbegotten reason. Those people aren't going to forget. I wouldn't forget. Generations from now, they'll be coming back to get our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and somebody will turn around someday, something will happen, like what happened on 9/11, and folks will be going, what? What happened? Why'd they do that? Well, it's a long memory, folks. It was in The Godfather, and it's true to life in the Middle East. Well, we're going to leave it there. Doc, thanks for being on. We'll come back here with you again very soon. We've run over our time for our regular podcast, but this is live on YouTube, so who cares?
Thank you.
Yeah. Dr. Steffen W. Schmidt, he's the Lucken Endowed Professor of Politics at Iowa State University. a professor that is a commentator on politics worldwide, and he's good enough to come on a podcast by George. If you like this, matter of fact, I can put my little banner up, I think. Here, see this? Let's go here. We're going to run, see that little ticker across the screen there? Please subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook. We need to boost the audience a little bit on YouTube. And of course, we're followed on Twitter and got a good audience on iTunes and even Spotify. We're on the iHeartRadio app and places like that. But that's going to do it for today. That's going to wrap it up. That's another podcast by George.